Yeah, I'm experimenting with recording this, but I don't know if I can do a full screen view while recording it. For those who wanted a recording. Let's see here.
If it doesn't come up automatically, but choose input. Choose
Right. Super. Yeah, looks good.
Always looks good. That's the most important, right?
Well, welcome everybody, and as I mentioned last time, it was a long pilgrimage, and what I want to do is share a few stories each Sunday, and also invite us to share stories with each other, because one of the things a pilgrimage does is kind of open up your heart and your life again, and that's the part that I want to share with you all. To see if any of these themes or experience resonate with you, and for you to share as you wish around your tables with each other. So we'll have a break or two each Sunday for a little bit of your own reflection and sharing and listening to each other. I invite you to mostly listen rather than comment and start a lot of dialogue and back and forth. But let each story just be heard and honored for, where it is and where it's coming from. So I want to focus today a little bit on pilgrimage. And there were a few people, like the Pillars, who can't be here and who wanted this. So I'm recording the presentation, but only this part. Your own stories, your tables are not going to be recorded, just me and my voice. But if you ask a question of me in this part of the presentation, which I do encourage, you can ask any questions anytime, that would be recorded then, but not your own table conversations. So pilgrimage is an experience of walking. Pilgrimage is something that comes from many faiths, and it connects us to that life of faith, which itself is a journey. Our journey of life begins with our birth and ends with our death. Sometimes in the life of the church, we say our life begins with baptism and ends with our final commendation and anointing, if we think of it in a sacramental sense. But a pilgrimage is a place of deepening your relationship with God through a set-aside time and place away from home in which you're walking a journey. Pilgrimage is a personal journey for each one, and it's also shared with other pilgrims and others that are met along the way, local people, and those many thousands of people who support the life of pilgrims. One of the most touching things for me along El Camino de Santiago was how along this route across northern Spain, whole communities have been wired for about 14 centuries to support the lives of those who are taking a spiritual pilgrimage. And what that looks like and what that is suggesting, what that suggests. One of my friends says, when you walk El Camino, you can't help but digest your life. that the hours and hours of walking each day just sort of bring things up on rhythm. You reprocess things that maybe you haven't thought about for a long time, or something that just happened yesterday. It provides a different rhythm for that. And of course, it's supported by the church. There are so many churches that were founded along the way, some very ancient, some newer ones, that are open places of prayer and hospitality, and that may have pilgrim masses in the evening, where that is, a simple, like our Sunday service, with Eucharist, and often offering a particular blessing for the pilgrims at the end of the service. It might be as a part of the service or right after the dismissal. The priest will say, right after, anyone who's a pilgrim, come on up. And he might have dialogue with us. He might be just asking where we're from, or might be doing something else. But that's celebrated along the way. So that idea of pilgrimage is foundational from our scriptures in the Bible. We heard a gospel that included Father Abraham, and Genesis chapter 12 puts Abraham forward as the faith ancestor. The Lord said to Abraham, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. So Abraham's life was to be a long pilgrimage that apparently he took. He traveled across the ancient Near East a couple of times, and then when there was a famine, did another move down to Egypt, kind of as a pilgrim refugee for assistance, and came back. So Abram's life of pilgrimage was described in the scriptures as in obedience to God and in faith that God would indeed show him where it was he was to go. Then, of course, God's people having the exodus from Egypt and being led out into freedom, and it's commemorated at Passover. And in Jesus' own life, he went on at least once a year from the time he was a child on a pilgrimage with his parents and relatives and community to Jerusalem. So he'd go on foot. So this was kind of a regular, expected part of worship and life with God. Within the Jewish tradition, it has come forward into the Christian tradition, though it's not compulsory in our tradition, though it's expected in the Jewish tradition that the people who could would make that pilgrimage to Jerusalem for Passover. In our tradition, it's not compulsory. It has been described as compulsory at certain eras by the church. We're aware of another Abrahamic faith, Islam, where there's a pilgrimage that's an expected part, that at least once in one's lifetime one would make a pilgrimage to Mecca, and that pilgrimage is called the Hajj. And so, that carries forward the Abrahamic faiths all recognize pilgrimage. Now, of course, pilgrimage can and is part of the Hindu faiths and the Buddhist faiths as well. But like Christianity, it's not compulsory or expected in every tradition. In our Christian tradition, the early pilgrimages were, of course, to Jerusalem, where Jewish people had been used to going for Passover, and where Jesus died and rose again. And so those pilgrims were called palmer, or palmeros. In Spanish, they talk about, the palmeros are the ones who would make pilgrimage to Jerusalem, or palmeras, or female pilgrims to Jerusalem. Then pilgrimages to Rome became common when Rome became the center of the Western Church, the Catholic Church. And they were called Romeras or Romeros, people going to Rome. And pilgrims along El Camino de Santiago are peregrinos or peregrinas, which is just the Spanish word for pilgrims. So those are the three primary pilgrimages still in the Christian tradition, but there's one across England. As I mentioned last time, El Camino de Santiago has many routes that lead into it. This route, the Camino Frances, is the one traveled by about 80% of the pilgrims, and that's the one I traveled. But there's the Camino Inglés that starts on the Isle of Britain in England and crosses the Channel or the Atlantic and then comes down to Santiago from the north. There's the Camino Portugués. There are Caminos from the south of Spain. I met a pilgrim from Morocco who would come up from the south. There are pilgrimage routes that end in Santiago that start in Budapest and go way across Europe and take longer to complete. So, the practice of pilgrimage is that pilgrims typically go on foot and carry their belongings. And so that's a little bit of a stripping down to the basics. That you carry the clothing that you're going to wear and the water that you're going to drink. But you're also recognizing your need, that you need hospitality from others, that you're trusting that there will be food, that there will be a place to stay, and so on. Some of us, it's possible and traditional to walk El Camino and just walk until you need to rest and stay at a hostel or somewhere like that. I chose, as I mentioned last time, to go from reservation to reservation and stay in simple hotels because I wanted a private room in COVID times. So that meant I had a certain amount of walking that I had to do each day. I had to figure that out in advance, which I thought I could do each day, what was the right amount, and it worked out pretty well for me. Pilgrims, of course, meet locals and each other. A pilgrimage means you take the time that you need to take. You decide when you need to rest. You decide how early you need to start in the morning. But it is about taking time. And time is a great currency, isn't it? Sometimes we feel we don't have enough time. In fact, we have all the time in the world. It's what we decide to do, and pilgrimage can maybe help reset our own relationship with time. What it's for, how it functions in our lives. Pilgrims share a life of prayer and in churches along the way. I'll talk more about that in the future, maybe. And pilgrimages enable one to meet their true self. You spend a lot of time with yourself. And we each carry within us that false self that resists God and that is captivated by things, perhaps fears, anxieties, perhaps wrong desires. And then the true self is the self that's found in God. And we hopefully want to meet and encounter that true self that is beloved and that is a part of God's life in the world and our life in Christ. So that's at the heart of pilgrimage is that encounter.
Do pilgrims sometimes camp along the way rather than seek lodging?
They do, yeah. Not too many. I'll introduce you to one pilgrim in the future who was there with his German shepherd, and his name was Matthias, and he was homeless, in his life in Germany and along Altamira, but it didn't matter. He was there with his dog and his tent. He and I tracked each other for most of Altamira to Santa. It was astounding. So I'll say more about him, but there were a few. There aren't too many campgrounds in that part of Spain, but there are some, and you can also just sort of pitch a tent along the side of the road. There's a lot of agricultural land, and one of the things that's quite different is that it's not a place that was colonized by homesteaders. Let me say. So farmers don't live on their land. The agricultural land is just land that's worked or that animals are grazing on, but you don't have little farmhouses on that land. People live in towns and they go out to work the land. But the land is just land, open land tracts for growing things. So no one's going to stop you from pitching a tent along there. So I'll talk later about all the motivations for pilgrims as they're many, but right now I'm going to talk about those of us who are Christian. Not all pilgrims are Christian or even subscribe to any faith tradition. But those who are encouraged to set an intention, to just prayerfully be in dialogue with the Holy Spirit and say, what is this pilgrimage about? I know new things will open up for me as I walk, but why am I being drawn to a pilgrimage right now? So I sat with that for a long time. I certainly, when I wrote the grant proposal more than a year ahead of time, I wrote about wanting to deal with stories, my own and others, but I didn't know what my spiritual intention was until shortly before I left, and it kind of crystallized for me that it was alabanza, in Spanish, praise, which is not quite the same thing as gratitude. It comes out of gratitude, but it is sort of deepening in praise of God in all things. The Psalms sort of end with that note in Psalm 150. Let everything that has breath praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. So just that desire for every breath, every part to be praised and to stabilize Christ consciousness within myself. Would be another way of saying that consciousness or awareness of Christ in and through all things. To be able to just be with that without my usual to-do list at home and life and work. That's the special part of a pilgrimage, is you can be laying some of that aside for some of these intentions. Now, the reality of pilgrimage is whatever your intention, there will also be detours, there will be unexpected meetings, inclement weather, injuries, delays, decisions to be made, time alone and time with others. There will be inconveniences, and that is all good, because that's how life is too, right? And so pilgrimage is somewhat of a set-aside school for life, and an invitation to work within oneself as one encounters these things. So the inner journey of intention and prayer, and the outer journey of walking recalibrate and reinforce each other during the pilgrimage.
So, Pastor, were you there when they had all the fires in Portugal and Spain?
Sure.
Okay.
Not too much.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to invite you to chat with each other. Take 10 minutes at your tables and share anything you've had, any experience you have had with spiritual pilgrimage. This visual is a sign from early on. It's from leaving Roncesvalles, which I'll get to in a minute. But you see that sign, it's in kilometers. There's 790 kilometers to go. and the waymark appears. Usually the waymarks weren't quite that clear, but that one's very clear which way to go. But share an experience from a pilgrimage, a retreat, or a journey you took to a special church or a pilgrimage or spiritual site where you experienced a deepening of your relationship with God. You can work with that question. You could also talk about, could you consider Sunday worship a mini pilgrimage each week, and why or why not? And do you hope to take a longer pilgrimage sometime? And if so, what do you have in mind? So I'll invite you to just work with those questions, share thoughts and stories with each other. Yeah, you who are at a smaller table, why don't you join into, pick a table to join. And I'll shut down the recording for a few minutes and invite you to just share from your own experience and for the others to listen to any responses that someone might want to share.
You were terrible. Well, had a lot of
It seems like, do you need a little more time at your table? It seems like this question of pilgrimage has had some real resonance in this community. Are there things that you feel could be lifted from your own table conversations around pilgrimage that have kind of come to you in the conversation? I heard one from this table about how you were kind of considering pilgrimage.
Just, we were noticing a commonality in the stories, some to do with ascension, but basically it seemed as though however you performed the act, you were seeking God's presence and you were seeking a kind of communion with the Spirit, and that was what pilgrimage seemed to be, however you did it.
Thank you. Yes?
I want to lift up something that Mary shared, because they were comparing their bike ride. You're going at such a slower pace, and you stop and you rest, and then you talk to the locals, and you find this commonality as you talk to people in different places.
Yes. Yes, for sure. And it's possible to bicycle El Camino de Santiago. And there were people who did that. I had my own bias around that. I think bicycling in our country makes a lot more sense in some ways. Some of the routes of El Camino were a little rough for bikers, and some were very conscious and conscientious of those on foot, and others you felt like we're going to barrel you down. So you needed to have a mountain bike if you're going to bike El Camino de Santiago. There are parts where there's a bike way and a walking way, but most of it is a shared way. And it's a little different. It's really more built for walking, in my view, and also the density of things to see is so great there, whereas, you know, in our country, like an amazing cross-country bike trip, you know, you stop, but you're going more quickly through things that one could go more quickly through, frankly, you know, some open areas. But that's a wonderful observation, you know, of that special set-aside travel in that way, where you're open to the whole different set of people you're going to be meeting.
Although we have a friend who's having a Camino
On
on
bike.
a bicycle,
Uh-huh.
he was in his 80s.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And I heard a beautiful audio story in Spanish about a person who used a hand bike with the help of others after an accident where she lost the use of her legs and completed it, and that was a huge deal for her. So there can be very good reasons also. So I don't want to make overgeneralizations, and teach them. Anything else? On our mini Camino here, last May 1st, ARPA printed these beautiful little passports, you know, where you get stamped. And in fact, one does use a credencial. And this is mine from El Camino, where you can, let's see in the camera here, where the credencial gets stamped, often by the place you stay, but you can also get it stamped at a bar or a restaurant. Not all of them have a sale or a stamp that they give you, but many do. And so it provides a couple of things. One, it's just a fun little, oh, here's where it was, here's where we were that time. But also, at the end, if you want a certificate of completion of any kind, then there actually is a trained person who reviews your credential. And you're expected to get at least one sale or stamp per day. And in the last 100 kilometers, 2 a day. So it's it's just something to bear in mind. Have I gotten my sale today? And again, it's not required. It's part of the tradition, and that's where probably Lutherans could be a little looser on this than Catholics. There were a lot of Catholics walking El Camino, some very devoted, active, traditional, and they would certainly be tending to this. Others more loosely affiliated, some carried credentials, some did not. The certificate of completion that, you know what, maybe we'll share a conversation about indulgences. I have one.
Do you have an indulgence?
I do.
Whatever mischief will you get up to?
And I paid nothing for it. But also in the Catholic Church. And so for many Spanish pilgrims who don't feel like crossing over into France, that might be the beginning point of their Camino. And here you see the oldest church over to the right that's still standing is from the 14th century. The current one that's being used is big, and that's the one to the left. And the whole set of rooms, it's a large building, and within the courtyard, is actually attached to the church, so it's really built for pilgrims. And there at the Pilgrim Mass, the priest was a singing priest. He walked in to celebrate the Mass singing. And he sang throughout, and even while he was offering communion. It was a new experience. You know that song, "You have come down to the lake shore," about, fishermen following Jesus. He sang that in Spanish while giving communion. He sang the whole time, the whole thing. But it was so joyful and beautiful. And Roncesvalles has the tradition of being a refuge since the 12th century. The refuge in Roncesvalles was to receive, there's a written document that says, all pilgrims, sick and well, Catholics, Jews, pagans, heretics, and vagabonds, all were to be received. And that is sort of the sense of what it means to show hospitality to pilgrims along the way. And the Augustinians were those who really partnered in this place. Roncesvalles means Valley of the Thorns, or roses, the thorns in particular. So, and this open hospitality continues to this day. There's a judicial agency in Europe that actually offers criminal offenders the opportunity to walk the Camino as a way of purging them of their misdeeds in lieu of jail or a custodial sentence. And that if they complete it, then the thought is they would have found self-respect and engendered a reformed life. And the story, it's told in The Road to Redemption. It's a website. And people, mentors are to accompany. These are mostly teens and young adults. And the mentors who accompany them are paid a little for their time, but they invite people who themselves have not walked the Camino before. So they're not experts. They want it to be a new experience for them as well. And they are also camping. And so, it's a little bit of a rough go for everyone, including, a lot of testing boundaries and limits. And then also, as I've shared in sermons since returning, that astounding experience of just being offered gifts along the way. And so, young people who are so-called offenders who've been in this program might describe, I've been offered these amazing gifts. People have invited me into their place to stay. What in God's name are they doing, inviting someone like me here? And so they experience that. They experience being invited into family gatherings and holiday gatherings along the way, and that way of life, of hospitality that has grown up around El Camino is, I kept thinking there's a lot about the life of the church for all the pilgrims on the way that we might reflect on and wonder about what would it be like for us to really, I think we already do, but to sort of have that same vision.
Pastor,
Yes?
is there some limit to the offenses that would be offered?
I'm not sure. I'm not intimately familiar with the program. So I don't know. I imagine so.
Is there something like the indulgence that you receive that is given to those offenders?
Yeah, so that's right. They when they complete, it's a get out of jail free card. That they have completed their requirement, and the thought is that this is we could talk a lot about prisons and whether caging humans is a good idea, but this is a different view that is, deeply Christian, that sort of says, let's just see. if we can take someone on the road, what that might do.
Especially with a mentor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So these are just some images of the way in the province of Navarre, which is the first one you go through. It's the Basque country, and it's just beautiful. One of the more beautiful parts of Spain. And so you see these old churches along the way, pathways, little towns and villages. You know, a lot of horses. The people are not in general wealthy. I mean, they throughout, especially the eastern part of Spain, a lot of people grow the food they eat. They have beautiful home gardens. Like, I would just stop and admire these gorgeously kept rows and gardens and the sorts of things that they would grow. People, you know, would have their own chickens, have their own goats, have their own sheep, horses. They ate the horses sometimes. You know, it's that kind of way of life in Nevada. But there's a lot of open space, and so I was really, really grateful to come up along. I was hungry, didn't have any food, and so there was a little pop-up place where you could buy, I think I bought a beer actually, because I was very hot and thirsty, and could get a snack, and both were needed at that moment. And I met a journalist from Norway named Heidi Marie, who was writing an article about El Camino de Santiago and trying to meet pilgrims. So I gave her some time for an interview because she wanted to talk with me about who I was and why I was walking El Camino. And she was talking with a lot of people. And I asked her, well, what are you finding? You know, why are people walking El Camino? And she said, well, you know, many of the same reasons I've read about in the past, that they're seeking a different grounding for themselves. Maybe people don't have as much direct God language because Europe is, and the whole world is more and more secular. However, there's a lot of people just seeking, and some will say directly that they're seeking God, but others will just say, you know, I'm seeking, or need something I'm working out, or something I'm carrying, and we'll talk about that, you know, a grief that needs to be sort of walked out. Many different reasons, but it was delightful. We exchanged emails. She never did email me the article she wrote, but I do that too. Sometimes I don't follow up when I intend to with someone I've met. So a few more images along the way of the pretty things.
Is the middle one a garden to be?
Sorry?
Was the middle one a garden, or was that a?
You know, that wasn't yet a garden. That was a, it's not gonna let me go back. But I think it was like designs in the sand. It wasn't a particular fertile area. So then came across this parish church of St. Lucia. There's so many old churches, and often I would stop and look in them. But someone I was walking with, who'd walked this way before, said, there's a really interesting church that if we have time we should check out while we're walking. And there I met this man named Neil. He's South African, and he was a very active young person. I think he was like a competitive rock climber. Took a big, long fall off a mountain that he wasn't supposed to survive, and had severe injuries, was never supposed to walk again. but did, rehabbed, walked again. Became a world-famous photographer, photographed many kings, queens, rulers, Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, he met them all. And then at some point in his life, he came to Pamplona with the intention of walking El Camino de Santiago, and he spoke no Spanish at the time. And so he, at an airport counter, he met a woman who was going also to Pamplona and helped him out. And then when he got there, he said, well, do you have time to show me around? And she did. They wound up getting married. And not too many miles or kilometers away, he kind of came upon this parish church that was just a building. Some believe the building was built as a fort in the 12th century and later converted to a church during the 13th century. It was falling down, but he was really drawn to it and thought there's something here, and felt that there was something for him to do. And so he took it up. He had his life with his new spouse in Pamplona, and then he also kind of created a place for himself to live at this church and started restoring it and excavating it. It just became his life's work and his passion at that point. And he said, I don't, identify as like with any particular church. I don't even think I'm a very spiritual person, but I'm really drawn to be doing this. And so he was so interesting, and I regretted it later in the day because I spent about 45 minutes just learning from him and talking with him, and then it got really hot and I got lost. I couldn't get, this was one of my early stops in the day. So, but he helped, I took off my big backpack I was carrying again, and he helped me put it back on my back after we were done. He said, woo, that's kind of heavy. He said, no, you're carrying your fears. I said, ouch. I said, oh, really? How much food do you have in there? I'm afraid there's not going to be something to eat. How many changes of clothing? I'm afraid I won't have the right clothing. How many, personal items? You think there won't be there for you? How big is your bag? So I shed a little bit, but that sort of stuck with me from, he had been with and observed many pilgrims, and himself had learned through his injury and recovery to deal with his fears. He had his spouse divorced. She felt he was giving too much time to this project. It was away too much, and he said that might be true. They had a daughter together. She moved to London with their daughter, who does come to visit. He has stage 4 prostate cancer, and he is dedicated to his daughter. He said, I take that awful chemo in the morning, and this is for you, Monkey. He's definitely a part of her life, and inside the church, he has literally uncovered bones and graves, and he has reached out to UNESCO, to the Spanish cultural ministries. He's really trying before he passes from this world to get this place preserved and recognized, because he feels that there's a lot that's unique. The fact that there are people, including at least one child, buried there. So he'd come across this in his own work and then let it rest and contact the authorities and say, what's the next step? This is what he's been uncovering toward the front of the church that he's describing. as like the front of the altar area, there's this primitive painting behind it. And you see it and you wonder, way back in the 900 years ago, what was that life of worship like in that place? How did people believe? What did they believe? You see, they put, they drew this diagram with all these little marks and dots, and then two circles at the corners with sun rays going out. And a little bit of a closer look shows, these figures, and he said, this isn't anywhere else in the world, but, what do you think that is? He has his own theory.
But could it have started as definitely as a fortress or a palace, because we saw that.
Yeah, but they think so, but within 100 years or less was converted to a church. So this definitely is, religious or sacred art of some kind, a very primitive type.
Is that a cross at the top?
It is a cross at the top. So,
And the little marks, do they represent people or?
They're trying to be a tile. They're trying to make a tile.
to make a tile, it doesn't appear to, but maybe. So Linda, his thought is that, that they were representing people or souls, and there seems to be these passages, right? Where there's this large dispersed group and then more concentrated. And then when you go up to the top, I've got a little bit of a closer look. You see them clustered around the cross, and then there's a little bit of transformation through the top. And so there's some imagination at work there. But he thinks that has to do with, the passage of the life of faith and the passage with Christ through death into resurrected life or whatever those folks might have been believing. What do you see?
If that's supposed to be, earth down below, and then through Christ you go on to another life, you leave your busy little body behind, and it's more dreamy and heaven.
Yeah, I don't know.
And I see 3 angels up there with trumpets. It's a Rorschach. That's a Rorschach.
Yeah.
Oh, the cross almost looks like a person.
Yeah, Christ on the cross.
Right.
Linda, I see.
Monk. So these are the sorts of things one kind of comes upon. And I was so taken by both Neil and his story. So we've almost come to the end of our time, but the questions maybe I'll leave you with are, have you ever had a chance encounter that changed your life? In Neil's case, with the woman from California, as well as with his encounter with this building, just walking out Camino and checking it out and taking over his life. And then what about pilgrimage or Neil's story is touching you today? What is it connecting to in your life story or your story with God? If there's any who would like to share.
I'm just thinking that he didn't really know why he's doing this. And the not knowing is kind of interesting to me, because because our brains want to know, but our bodies maybe aren't giving us a direction, and we have to just follow that.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And
We want to know before we even start.
So that's
we want to know all the details.
Thank you. Thank you that that's resonating with you. And I think many sort of have that experience. We might not be able to articulate or have a rational explanation for what we're drawn to do. And maybe that lack keeps us from doing things. We don't feel we can explain it to ourselves or others. Also,
Or somebody else
yeah,
who asks us,
right.
oh, why?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else feel like sharing what's touching you?
I would say that it's interesting seeing what Neil thinks of this with a non-religious background.
Yeah.
I'd like to see what somebody who has a religious background thinks of that.
So he's really worked hard to get the Catholic diocese to, take this on as a project and to kind of adopt this so it's not an orphan parish. And that's somewhere in process. He's constantly negotiating with them because he really wants to leave this in the hands of an entity that can take over its care and restoration and possibly begin functioning as a parish church again one day.
So did you come upon a lot of churches like this that have been abandoned?
A number, but also many that are functional.
And every little town had a church.
Almost. So I would say every little town had a church. Some of them were so tiny that the church was not an operating parish. So there was one town I came to later that was basically 2 hotels and a bar restaurant. And the only people left in the town were people who were running those and their families. So it was less than 30 people who lived in the town. It was a beautiful old church there, but there wasn't a community to support that parish church anymore. So it's a building that was just closed.
What happened to the communities? Change in farming, change in...
Yeah, I don't know the full story. I think economically it just became not the center that it had been, but I didn't learn that whole history in that place. So, well, thank you for sharing this time and this story. May God bless you on your own journeys of the week. And,
Thank you.
Thank you.